let's talk about what to secure. When we talk about security, we talk about the CIA triad. CIA, not the agency, but CIA stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And this is the basis of which your security stands. So any course, any training that you go through will always talk about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And this is the triangle or the triad that we're talking about. So when we talk about CIA and we talk about confidentiality, confidentiality is the aspect where we want to keep the data secret based on the value of the data to us. For example, there would be data that is publicly being displayed. For example, the data that we publish on our website, which when a user goes on is clearly visible over there. But there would be some data that the company needs to keep private or within themselves so that the data would have proprietary value to that organization and that could be sold as a business. Even within an organization, when you're talking about data, there would be classification levels. There would be data that would be made available depending on the hierarchy and the roles of people within that organization. So when we use those access control lists and we try to keep data available only to those authorized users when they want it, that's what confidentiality is. Identifying and classifying that data in such a way that the data is available only to authorized users as and when they want it. Now, integrity is the part where we want to keep the data trustworthy. Even if somebody is able to access it or allowed to access it, they should not in an unauthorized or an unintentional manner be able to change that data without it being audited. There would be mistakes that a person commits at some point in time where those mistakes also need to be weeded out, because mistakes can basically alter the data in such a way where it would stop making sense. So the integrity part is where we are trusting the data, or we are ensuring that the trustworthiness of the data is intact so that consumers, when they connect to that data, they can rest assured that the data is valuable and is correct at its point in time. The availability part is where, keeping the data confidential and its integrity intact, we still need to ensure that the data is available to all authorized users as and when they need it. So this is the three aspects that you're going to use. Confidentiality, the first defense for confidentiality is using proper access control list. So we decide who's allowed to access the data and who's not allowed to access that data. Once we have created the authorization, we want integrity verification mechanisms. For example, hashing. So we have some data stored, we create hash values of that data and we store them in a secret file. We keep on taking the hash value of those data to see the match. So if the hash value that we have taken now matches the hash value that we had taken earlier, the data is still intact, it has not been modified. But if the data gets modified even by a single character, the entire hash value changes. So if the hash value of the current data does not match the hash value of the data that was taken before, then the integrity is no longer there. Now, integrity verification cannot be done on files that keep on changing often. Normally, we will use system critical files or some very secret files that remain static and do not change often. Only then can we take hash values and then we can compare them properly to see if they have been modified or not. The availability part is creating redundancy. The infrastructure in such a way that even if there is a small failure, we can absorb the failure, we can still move on, and still that data can be made available to the end user. Motives behind this attack. Let's discuss motives behind these attacks. So, the first motive of any attacker, especially when we have discussed denial of service or distributed denial of service, would be to disrupt business continuity. The business, if discontinued or if there's an interruption in the continuity of a business, would cause great harm to the organization. Let's say in lost profits, lost businesses, lost revenues, loss of goodwill, service level agreements not being adhered to, which would cause penalties to be paid to the customers and the clients, and so on and so forth. Apart from that, information theft and manipulating data. Hackers normally would steal information from organizations and then would try to resell them on the black market or to competitors so that they can make a quick buck. Creating fear and chaos by disrupting critical infrastructure. This is where terrorist hackers could attack organizations or could attack governments, crippling some of the services that they provide to the nation or to some particular areas, thus creating fear and panic amongst its citizens and thus harming the nation as a whole. Financial loss to the target. We have all talked about banks getting hacked, money being stolen from there, individuals getting compromised by phishing attacks and losing their life savings. Similarly, organizations can also lose a lot of money if they get hacked, especially with the new laws in the market where they may have to pay penalties not only to the customers but to governments for failing to protect particular data. Achieving states' military objectives. Countries keep on spying on each other. We have heard a lot of news in the recent world where a specific country like Russia was supposedly involved in the US election and so on and so forth. So some of these attacks could really happen in the world. In fact, if you take into consideration Iran and the nuclear strategy that they had created and what Flames and Stuxnet created as a havoc as far as Iran's nuclear reactor was concerned. Demanding ransom. This is a very recent case in 2017 where WannaCry was released to the world and it infected a lot of computers, costing the world around $4 billion in losses. Damaging reputation of the target, loss of goodwill. You wouldn't want to trust a business who gets hacked, right? So, the thought process is, if you cannot secure yourself, how would we expect you to secure critical data or sensitive data of your customers? And then propagating religious or political beliefs. We have organizations like ISIS who have a lot of propaganda online, a lot of videos, audios, where they keep on targeting people who are susceptible to these kind of videos and try to recruit them for their own causes. So these are some of the motives behind these attacks. A motive could be anything. For example, an hacker could just be doing it for fun. Maybe somebody is just trying to hone their skills or learn new skills, and they just try it out against a particular victim without the victim even being realizing it, or the hacker actually having nothing against that victim. So a motive could be anything and everything that you can think of, anything that would encourage a hacker to attack a particular organization or any organization at random. Now let's talk about how to secure a computer. Now, there are multiple ways of securing computers. See, these are some of the basic ways. We are not going into advanced ways. We are still not talking about data centers. We are looking at end users. We are looking at talking about securing computers. So the first and the foremost is a two-way authentication mechanism. Most of us use that on a regular basis. We have secured our Gmail and Facebook accounts with two-way authentication, where we use usernames and passwords, and then an OTP or a one-time password is texted to us or sent to a particular email address, which we then have to input to then get access to the required resources. Securing passwords, we also have been told quite a number of times that passwords need to be secure, which means that they should not be easy to guess. They should not be based on names. They should not be something dear to us. Shouldn't be a reverse of a mobile number or a combination of date of birth and the mobile number. Basically, a password should be randomized, should be of a length of not less than 8 characters. 26 characters is supported, so it depends how much you want to secure your password with. Again, there are so many passwords to remember. That's where we actually start lacking in our password creation skills, where we use a same password for multiple accounts, or then create a password that we can remember easily and then use those passwords. But in a sense, a password should be randomized, should not be created on anybody's name, anybody's likeliness, should not be dictionary based, but should be combination of uppercase and lowercase A through Z, 0 through 9 special characters, and it should be randomized. The string should not be less than 8 characters, can go up to 26 characters maximum. Regular updates, this is very important. When we use softwares, and we are especially relying on third-party softwares, for example, operating systems, either we are using Linux, Microsoft, or Mac, there will be flaws and vulnerabilities that would be identified in any of the operating systems on a regular basis. And that is why when we purchase a license, we get free updates for life of that operating system. As individuals, it is important that we keep on installing these updates. These updates may not only be functional in nature, but could also be security updates. For example, Microsoft releases security updates every second Tuesday of every month. These security updates are collected together. These basically are patches that have been created to patch the most critical vulnerabilities, the most common vulnerabilities that have been identified not only by Microsoft, but have been reported to them by third-party organizations and individuals as well. And here I'm just saying Microsoft, it could be anything. You could be using a third-party application, which you have downloaded and installed. You need to keep on updating it. It could be as simple as management softwares or maintenance softwares that you have installed on your machines. Microsoft Office, if you will. Any software, once installed, needs to be maintained. Its patches to be identified and installed on a regular basis so that the most common known vulnerabilities on those applications would be plugged in, thus reducing your risk of getting hacked by an existing vulnerability. Antiviruses. In today's world, when we spend so much time on the internet, we interact with so many people, we send and receive emails with attachments, and we download a lot of data off the internet. Now, an antivirus is there to help us to identify whether any of these files that we are uploading, downloading, receiving via attachments could be malicious or could have a Trojan or a virus in it. So the antivirus job is to scan these files and warn us if there is anything malicious about that file. Then firewalls. Now, what is the difference between an antivirus and a firewall? An antivirus scans for files and malicious scripts or data within those files. Firewall is a software or a hardware that will allow or disallow certain protocols or certain connections from happening. So a firewall is configured in such a way where you allow certain protocols to work, certain ports to be opened, certain services to be functional. If a firewall is configured to block a particular service, any incoming or outgoing connection, as the rule may be, will be blocked by the firewall, thus safeguarding the end user from that kind of a connection. Phishing. Phishing attacks are very common nowadays. There are a lot of anti-phishing toolbars available on the internet. I personally use Netcraft. These anti-phishing toolbars basically look at the sites that we visit on a regular basis and then give us a risk rating of whether the site is genuine or is a probable fake site. On a regular basis, we also receive emails from unknown sources about lotteries that we have won, or a Nigerian prince who has left a few $1 billion, and we receive SMS on our mobile phones as well. So we need to first verify the authenticity of these emails to understand whether these are genuine emails or fake mails. How to do that, we'll be looking at that in a future video of how to identify phishing mail and how to identify whether the mail is genuine or not. Cryptography, encryption. Try to encrypt as much data as possible. But be aware that with encryption, you would be consuming a little bit more compute power, maybe a little bit more network bandwidth, and a little bit more storage. So there has to be a fine balance of how much encryption we want to use compared to how much compute and how much capacity that we have. But in today's world, with the latest laptops having at least 8 GB RAM and a i5 processor being common, encryption is a very good option. Once, let's say, an entire volume or a hard disk has been encrypted, even if somebody tries to get access to it, they would not be able to understand the data till they crack the encryption key to decrypt that particular data. When we are transmitting data over the line, we always should be using HTTPS. The S stands for SSL or TLS, Secure Socket Layer or Transport Layer Security, which ensures that data is encrypted while it is being transmitted over the intranet or the internet. And securing your DNS servers. DNS servers are domain name servers, which are basically indexes that allow mapping of a domain name to an IP address. For example, when we type in google.com in the address bar of a browser, the internet doesn't know what google.com is. There's a DNS server which would host an index of all the domains with their corresponding IP addresses. And it is these IP addresses that help us identify devices over the internet. So, securing these DNSs is very important. For example, if a hacker is able to send a fake update to a DNS, changing the mapping of a particular domain with a particular IP address, and the hacker then can host a malicious server, give it a particular IP address, change the mapping on the DNS server, and thus have unsuspecting users redirected to malicious websites without them even knowing what's going on. So, securing DNS in today's world is very much important. Let's go through some slides. Two-factor authentication adds layer of security to the authentication process by making it harder for attackers to gain access to a person's device or online accounts. As discussed, when we use online mechanisms, or let's say in this example, we are making an online payment, and when we are on the bank side, we type in what the payment recipient is, the amount, and all that data. And when we click on pay, we need to authenticate that the payment has been initiated by us. And so, the bank sends a OTP or a one-time password to us for authenticating the transaction, right? Once we receive the PIN or the OTP, we type it in the website, on the bank's website, and then the transaction is authenticated. If the PIN or the OTP is incorrect, the transaction gets invalidated right there and then. Secure passwords. So as we have been saying, passwords need to be strong. They need to be created in a certain manner, which can be randomized. So here we are prescribing at least 15 characters. Now I understand 15 characters of passwords which are unique to each and every account. It would be very difficult to remember. However, it is the necessity of the hour. And this doesn't mean that we create very complex passwords and then write them down on a piece of paper and keep that paper in our wallet. That's defeating the purpose. So we need to train our minds and train ourselves to create more effective passwords which cannot be guessed or cannot easily be cracked. So at least 15 characters, should include capital letters, should include special characters like @ ampersand, hashes, or percentile, and should include numbers. So as we've stated earlier, a password should be a randomized string of uppercase and lowercase alphabet, A through Z, 0 through 9 numbers, and special characters. It should be randomized in such a way that it should not be on a dictionary word, should not be a variant of a particular word. For example, normally we use the word PASSW0 or WORD as password, and then to complicate it a little bit, we use the variant P@SSW0RD. These are still easily hackable passwords because they are commonly used by a lot of users in the world. So we have to be very careful, and we have to create those passwords which are unique to us and are very difficult to crack. So for the second demo, let's go to this website, how secure my password is. And this will get you a little bit of an understanding of how long it would take for a computer to crack the current password that you have. And I don't suggest you actually type in your passwords, but just type in some random words to understand the complexity of a password, and how more complex the password, more lengthy the password, it would be difficult for a brute force attack for a computer to conduct, right? So here we are assuming that we are doing a brute force attacks. That means that we are going to try each and every combination of the character set to crack a password, and based on a regular machine, how much time is it going to take for that machine to crack a particular password. When we say a regular machine that an average person can purchase in a laptop or a desktop store, right? So if I just use the word PASSWORD, you can see that it can instantly be cracked because it's a very well-known password. If you scroll down, it will also tell you that this is a common password in the top 5 most used passwords. So people actually use this word password as a password. If I use a variant, let's say I do a P@SSW0RD, you will see that even if it's a variant, it would take 19 minutes for the computer to crack this password. And if I just add a few numerics, so we have P@SSW0RD. If I add 1, 2, 3, 4 at the end, you can see that since the password is now lengthy enough, even if it is not complex, even if it is not randomized, since the length of the password is quite big now, it would still take 200 years for a regular computer to brute force this password. Even if I use random words, if the key length or the password length is weak, it's small, it's less, it would still not be sufficient enough. For example, I'm typing in generic characters BWP. You can see it's 400 nanoseconds, 11 microseconds, BWPAFTWP. So even if I'm typing in random characters right now, all of them are lowercase and they're easily guessable. So it would still take 5 seconds for a brute force attack to work. But as I keep on typing in random characters, and as I increase the length of the password, you can see the number of years that it would take is increasing phenomenally. It is now 898,000 years for us to crack this password. I don't even know what I have typed so far, but since the key length is strong, the password is now efficient enough to withstand brute force attacks. Right? So that's the reason why not only randomness, we creating a random password is important. We having number of characters in a password is also very important. So I would suggest to have at least 12 characters to 18 characters in a password for it to be effective enough against brute force and dictionary based attacks. Regular updates for all the softwares is recommended. In fact, if possible, set it up for auto updates. If you're not comfortable with that, because it may require restarts and it may consume a lot of bandwidth in the background, especially if you're doing something that consumes bandwidth. For example, you're on a VoIP call and then suddenly something triggers an automatic update. So we don't want those scenarios to happen. So you can still keep them on a manual basis, but remember to at least check for updates once in a while. Maybe once or twice a week would be recommended. Over a period of time, you would realize how often the updates of an application are being sent, and then you can customize and you can then vary your updates or checking for updates as per your feedback that you're getting. So you get updates because the older version was hacked or was vulnerable. Some vulnerabilities could be reported by third-party users, or some organizations do a vulnerability assessment and penetration test themselves. Over a period of time, realize there are some flaws and will create updates and send it across to mitigate vulnerabilities. Antiviruses in today's world are a must. You need to keep these antiviruses, and again, an antivirus would be the perfect example of updates being installed. Almost on a daily basis, you will find new signatures being created for new viruses and worms and malwares that have been found on the internet. So it's just not that we install an antivirus and we forget about it. We have to install the antivirus, we have to keep it updated. There would be updates to the core antivirus that would be released by the organization over a period of time. Not only that, your signature databases would be updated regularly, almost daily, for newly identified viruses, worms, trojans, etc. So installing an antivirus and then keeping it updated is a wanted task. Firewalls, as discussed earlier, is a system designed to prevent unauthorized access to or from a private network. Now, what is authorized and non-authorized is a little bit different as far as firewalls are concerned. Firewalls will not be looking at users and passwords, but they will be looking at connections. So you can configure a firewall based on IP addresses, port numbers, MAC addresses, and maybe even a web application firewall with certain scripts that are allowed or disallowed. We'll be discussing firewalls in details later on in a particular video. Right now, let's just focus on having a good firewall installed and having it properly configured. And this is where the technicality comes in. So you want to allow a particular channel to be utilized, and you want to disallow another particular channel from being utilized. You have to create the specific rules in the firewall. So at the network level itself, if any threat is created, the firewall will try to mitigate it once and for all. Phishing. When you get an email that looks suspicious, you have no relation with, then do the following. Never click on that link given in the email. For example, you will get a lot of hyperlinks. Maybe you get a very genuine looking email from Facebook saying there has been some unauthorized activity on your account. Click here to verify your account. Verify the authenticity of that email. Do not click on those links. Check the header of the email. See where the emails actually come from. Or the best thing is right click on that link, click on copy link location and paste that hyperlink in a notepad. You will get the underlying path to where that link heads to. Verify that the path is correct, is actually owned by the organization who the email is representing. If yes, everything is fine. If not, something is wrong. Do not give any personal information or details if asked. You will see a lot of lottery winning emails coming in asking you for personal information like date of birth, address, phone numbers. All of these are very important to keep ourselves secure on the internet as well. Our identities could be leaked out and somebody could then hijack our identity and create havoc for us. So only give out information to trusted people. If you do not trust the email, try to verify the authenticity. If you are unable to verify the authenticity, reply back with a generic questions asking for further information about why you should reveal that information. If it's a genuine email, they would obviously respond with a favorable answer. If it's not a genuine email, you would not get a response. Do not open the attached files. So if you're getting attachments from unknown recipients or unknown senders and you're not able to trust that email, do not open the files or do not even try to download those files and try to look what those files are all about. It could so happen that there would be a virus, worm, trojan in that file and your computer could get infected. And then cryptography, or the encryption part that we talked about. Encryption is best used to protect our data, the confidentiality part of it. So cryptography is associated with the process of converting ordinary plain text into unintelligible text and vice versa. So when we want to mask data into being unreadable, so if somebody hijacks that data, they would still not make sense of it, then use cryptography or encryption. So on a regular basis, your banking transactions will always be encrypted with the highest standards or standards prescribed by PCI DSS. Computer passwords, they would not be encrypted per se, but cryptography would be used to hash them and store a hash of the actual password in the database rather than storing the clear text. And e-commerce transactions would be encrypted at any point in time. Apart from that, if you want to encrypt your own data or your own transactions or any other communications that you're making, it's up to you. We'll deal with encryption a little bit later as well, but there are a lot of options out there that will help us encrypt data. So let's move on to the third demo. We are going to look at encryption, or we're going to look at cryptography. And this is one site which allows us to look at text encryption and decryption. So how does this work? If I click on this link, it will take me to an application which allows me to encrypt a secret message that I can type. So I'm going to type in, this is to showcase encryption. So for me to encrypt this, I'll have to provide it a password. Let's say I'm going to use ASD@1234, and I am going to utilize AES for encryption, advanced encryption standards, right? The moment I encrypt it, the data would look like this in base 64 and encrypted hex format, right? If I provide the password correctly over here, only then will this be able to be decrypted. So if I take off the password and I say decrypt, you can see it says bad data. It automatically populated the password itself, but it says bad data. If I type in the password now, and if I click on decrypt, it should be able to reverse engineer and give us the actual message right there. This is to showcase encryption, right? That's what we had typed. So without the password, if you try to decrypt that, or if it's a incorrect password, it's going to be gibberish for the hacker if they're able to intercept this message. The moment you have this password and you can utilize this, the message can be decrypted and be seen in clear text. So those are the basic demos for this particular topic. As we go ahead, we'll start building on these demos and we'll see how we can actually utilize these to launch attacks on victims and how we can safeguard ourselves from these kind of attacks as well.